We do have a panel now that's talking about reciprocal research relationships, perspectives on promising practices. And it's about the way in which we as researchers and educators relate to each other. Indigenous researchers, non-Indigenous researchers relate to Indigenous communities. So we have 4 speakers. We are going to start out, and forgive me, I'm not actually going to read their biographies because they are listed in the program, and they are all extremely accomplished people, and if I read their bios, that would take up all our time. So I would ask you to read the bios of the speakers as they come up, but I'm going to actually spend my time having you listening to them rather than about them. We're going to start the panel with Dr. Malcolm King, who comes to us from the University of Saskatchewan and Skipper, which I'm sure he may have some comments about. And then we're going to go to Dr. Vivian Ramsden and her partner in crime, partner in good health, Norma Rabbitskin, and they're going to talk about the work that they do together in Indigenous communities. And then we're going to finish up with Jackie Ottmann, our Vice Provost of Indigenous Engagement. So I'm going to give each of the panelists about 15 minutes, and I will give you a notice when we're getting close. And so I'd like to start with Dr. King, and there's a microphone right there, or you can come up here, whatever works for you.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. I lived for many years in Edmonton, upstream on Treaty 6 territory. Actually, I knew Dr. Makokis when he was even a pre-med student. It was a wonderful talk, wasn't it, from Dr. Makokis? So I'm Malcolm King, and I'm new to Saskatchewan. Alexandra and I moved here about 4 months ago, and I'm now the scientific director of a unit called the Skipper, the Saskatchewan Centre for Patient-Oriented Research. And I want to talk about principles of working together, communities and academia, the health system, in good ways. So if I can move. I'm going to talk more about this in the parallel session this afternoon, but here's my chance with the whole audience. Many of you might know about this principle of two-eyed seeing. There are many different expressions of it, but this one was developed by a Mi'kmaq elder from Eastern Canada, Albert Marshall. And it says very elegantly that it's a statement of synergy, to use, to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous ways of knowing, and to see from the other eye with the strengths of Western ways of knowing, and to use both of these eyes together. And that's a very basic principle that I believe in, and that the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, for which I worked for 8 years as its scientific director for Indigenous health, adopted, because it's a way forward for our people to regain health and to maintain our health. I have another slide here, and this in a way will be a little bit of a teaser. It would probably take me at least my whole 15 minutes to explain this. And it very much relates to me, and I hope you don't mind, James Makokis. This kind of sums up in one slide a lot of what you were talking about this morning, and you did it so well. But it's the idea of those underlying and intergenerational traumas that lead to sickness, and that's been going on for 150 years here and more, leading to biological reactions, stresses, leading to both emotional, spiritual, mental, physical responses, negative coping behaviors, pathologies, and then ultimately these end manifestations that are played out as addiction, suicide, diabetes, and so on. Fixing all that, that's the Western medicine approach, is in many cases possible. Some cases it's still not. But it's very expensive, it's time consuming, it costs the health system a lot, it costs the people who work in the health system a lot. There are indigenous ways of going about it, land-based healing, counseling, as well as Western ways, pharmaceuticals and so on. But we don't want to get there. We want to work upstream with our people before they go down this road to ill health. And I love the example of your nephew, James, to keep that young boy healthy, knowing who he is growing up, so that he never goes down that road, this downhill stream. So these are what I call at the top, the resilient strategies. And again, there's really, I think, Western and Indigenous ways that we can approach this, but really the focus for Indigenous people ought to be on those resilient strategies that are based on our culture, our connections with land, and so on. And the other thing is we need to deal with those societal ills, the poor relationship that we have as Indigenous peoples with Canada, with Western society. It needs to be corrected. And so we need to deal with the social determinants of health, and we need to deal with reconciliation, resetting that relationship so that it's like it was in the two-row wampum belt that you talked about from 400 years ago. We need to get back to those principles of relationships between two peoples. Where this can come in, and I think Alexander King is going to talk about this more in her talk tomorrow. This is from work that our graduate student did in developing a story about hepatitis C and a model, and Norma Rabbitskin, you're a part of this too, so it's nice to see you on the stage. So trauma-informed care is that clinical way of bringing in both mainstream health care, in this case around the specific topic of hepatitis C infection, and Indigenous healing, where you bring in those concepts of wellness, culture, holistic approaches, and strengths-based spirituality, and recognition of the self. So again, I'm not going to talk about this a lot. I'll leave that for later in the conference. But I do want to get back to the reconciliation part of it. And again, I'm not an expert. I didn't grow up in the numbered treaty areas, and certainly this is Treaty 6, the heart of it, really, with the medicine chest clause. But those treaties, as you all know, were treaties of unequals, not like the earlier treaties, such as the two-row wampum. And we need to get back to even, to the meanings of those treaties. And there's another diagram, and this one will almost be my last diagram. This one comes from Willie Ermine, and I'm sure many of you in the room know about Willie. Many of you probably know him. He's a scholar and a lodge keeper. He's truly represents someone who knows both systems, the academic and his own Cree knowledge. This idea of finding ethical space is something that Willie is famous for. In fact, when I go around the world, people in New Zealand and Australia know about these teachings as well. The idea of two groups, the Western group and the Indigenous group, have very different worldviews, and they need to come together and find that ethical space. So this is part of this philosophy is what guides me in my work that I'm now doing with the Saskatchewan Centre for Patient-Oriented Research, because I think it's part of what we need to do to bring the Western system, the Western ways of knowing, Western ways of doing, together with Indigenous ways of knowing and doing, and to use those synergistically, as Albert Marshall talked about in his two-eyed seeing model. And so I see my role and the role of our center as helping both groups to find that ethical space to come together, because there's value and strengths in both ways, and I think we need both ways of knowing and doing, the Western and the Indigenous, in order to find the healing and the maintenance of holistic health that will keep our people well and together. I know that Vivian and Norma are going to talk more about ethics and the TriCouncil policy statement, so I don't want to steal their thunder, but I do want to finish off with one thing from, so for those who don't know the jargon, I should say the TriCouncil policy is a statement of ethics that comes from health research, scientific research, and arts and humanities research, and essentially all of the research councils in Canada that are supported by the federal government. And it has many different chapters, but there's a chapter called Chapter 9 that deals specifically with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis research. And the chapter has many different sub-chapters, but the one thing about it, and again this relates to my work with the Saskatchewan Centre for Patient-Oriented Research, it's not just for Indigenous people. There's certainly a priority in this province of Saskatchewan, but it's for everyone, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And this chapter has a small little paragraph, and I've put this out here, and I'm talking about it later on this afternoon, that the principles that are in that chapter of working respectfully in reciprocity with Indigenous peoples, with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, are good principles, and they can be applied to all work between academics, researchers, and the communities that they deal with. There's no reason why non-Indigenous communities should not have the same kind of respectful, reciprocal relationships with researchers that we're expecting to develop for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. And so I think I will sign off now, and I guess we'll have a chance for questions after everyone has spoken. So, Chimigwech.
Thanks, Dr. King. And yes, we will have time for questions. We'll make sure that we do have time for questions. So please either download your poll everywhere app so that you can ask questions via the technology or be prepared to ask questions from the floor. I want to make a couple of announcements before I call on our next speakers. It was brought to our attention by a colleague, a concerned colleague, and thank you very much for this, that some of our elders who are sitting at the tables are not getting food or water. So we are trying to care for the elders that we know are here, but sometimes we're not aware of them. So for those of you sitting at tables where elders need food and water and need to be tended to, could you please let us know, let me know, let Gabe know, or let any of the other conference planning people know, and we will make sure that they are attended to, or if you wish to just proceed to attend to them yourself, that is also quite fine. But we want to make sure that our elders are cared for. So thank you very much for drawing that to our attention, and we will try to remedy that if we know where the elders are. Another announcement. Thank you to the Saskatchewan Health Quality Council for their investment in this event and for sponsoring this panel. And as Dr. King alluded, each of the panel groupings, or individuals in group, have agreed to do a plenary session later on in the conference where they will talk more about their work. So you're just getting a taste here. So I'm going to introduce our next speakers. Dr. Vivian Ramsden and Norma Rabbitskin, registered nurse. And I just want you to know that I taught Norma Rabbitskin, and neither one of us have changed a bit. Not one bit. And that's our story, and we're sticking to it. So take it away, and I'll let you know when you've got some time. But take, please. Yeah.
And as I said to Lois, good luck with that. Anyway, it's an honor for us to be here today and to share with you some of our learning experiences. But first of all, before I begin, I want to congratulate my colleagues at the Behavioral Research Ethics Board of the University of Saskatchewan for actually integrating the elements and principles of Chapter 9 into daily practice. That has been a huge step forward for us as an institution. So as a learning objective, you always have to have something to think about. So I want you to be able to identify and describe the elements of authentic engagement. So by the end of this presentation, you should have some of those things put together. So I've taken Chapter 9 out, and I'm just going to share with you some of the elements that I think are critical to where we need to go together. Everybody talks about what is community. Well, community can be a number of different things, but I want you to think about what community means for you. And so in answering the questions, the community needs to be involved in describing that for you and with you. Respect is the cultural dynamic, but the biggest thing is reciprocity and trusting relationships, and they're not built in a day. So if you think that this is going to happen overnight, I encourage you to think about spending 12 months building a relationship, having coffee, thinking about what next steps might look like, and ways that you could actually build them together. As Holly Graham said, history has shaped current research relationships in one way or another, and oftentimes they're in a negative way, and we want to actually try and change that from being on to with. Dr. King mentioned earlier about Willie Ermine, but some of the things that we're really looking at is both ways are important, but the mutuality of it is critical. So in fact, we all have spaces in which to work, and if we're working in the ethical space, it allows us then to be more thoughtful. So here are the elements that I want you to think about in Chapter 9. If the research is likely to affect the welfare of the community, those people need to be involved. The nature and the extent of the engagement is determined by us together. And the communities should be considering applying the collaborative and participatory approaches. What does that mean? That means that generally, community-based or community-chosen interventions are driven by the community and not the researcher. So often the questions are not as defined as a lot of research grants would really like, But the bottom lines are that that community has an idea of what they want, and over time, that will evolve into a mutually respectful way of asking and answering a question. They need to build capacity. If you're going to do research in a community, I encourage you to think about how you're doing it. So in fact, the community's involved. There is in economic development involved with it, but there are also skills. So they learn skills about how to do interviews, they might learn skills about how to do data entry, they might learn skills about how to actually interpret and write. And my experience has been that most people will write, can write, and wish to write if you invite them to do so. Community-based participatory research is something we often talk about because it's community-based, it's participatory. That's great, but the thing that we don't often talk about is the with part. And your partnership needs to be equal. And what does that mean? That means that, in fact, when I'm looking at a research grant, that probably half of the monies would actually go to facilitate work in the community for the community. The fundamental principles of participatory research are around co-ownership, co-decision-making, and the whole fact that it's about the we. It's not about mine, it's about us. And so, in my humble opinion, you shouldn't be actually presenting work done in the community without the community. So I really strongly encourage you to think about, have you built that into your grant? And the values need to be negotiated with the community, not the community being told what they are. Over to Norma.
Tanse, siga son sauna guten piso school, na nasko mawanut no tawi no nut si bi imamonku yakuti bi ya totta makuma aski be matsun danski gis sitos kamak. Na nasko ma gihte yakanut ka kismochek go kan kamocheko ka aya napi wak gaska kyo ka kantom go ek na naskom to know. In my language, I said, hello, Tanse. I'm grateful to Creator for bringing us all together, and I give thanks to our wisdom keepers that said the prayers, and also the delegates, and also the hosters here and planners, and also my teachers, my mentors, who are still here guiding me along this path. I've been a nurse for over 29 years, and I've worked in many diverse roles, and I've always come back to my communities because that's where I feel at home. So I've been in Sturgeon Lake for the past 19 years, and so I am so grateful for this community that has taken their ownership of their health, and it's been a vision of their that they took this direction from the community elders and the knowledge keepers. So health transfer has been in place over, I guess, over 20 years now, and Sturgeon Lake has transferred their health services for that long. And so it was really a good fit because being brought up in the traditional ways of being and also with being trained in the Western framework. So this is where we are at in regards to research. We've been participating in health research along with Dr. Vivian Ramsden for over 10 years now. So I give thanks, I give gratitude to Sturgeon Lake for having that vision of taking ownership and guiding and integrating their model in place. And so I am a person that weaves in and out, and so I work as a nurse Monday to Friday as a senior health nurse, overseeing all the 3 streams with community health, primary care, and home and community care, and supporting my partner, Dr. Willie Ottmann, and who has retired from his professorship in First Nations University for the past year. So, but I've been helping with that. Developing that, grounding that traditional health program for the past 18 years along with the team. I also like to give credit to my health director, who's been a cornerstone of the work you need the support of the health director and the leadership in the community to make things happen. So she's been a strong leader and support with this work that's been undertaken in Sturgeon Lake. So for us, that's our health center here. It's about 6 years old, and we have all of those programs that we offer there, and it's a good patient-centered care. We have a doctor that comes every week, and it's been a vision that's been started with those questions. How can I make my community better, and how can I respond to the community needs? So Dr. McCocus talked about those two systems, and as a nurse, they say that I have to be a leader in describing how this looks in our colleagues, with my nursing colleagues, and it's been a challenge and continues to be a challenge, because when I sit at those regional tables, I bring my community's voice and also the elders' voice and the healers' voice, because this is what the elders had wanted, to restore that harmony. And so when we work with those two systems, we have to always take into consideration that as a nurse, that I have to be able to narrate what they're wanting. So as far as research, one of the biggest challenges we're seeing is the chronic diseases that are really rampant in our communities. And the research question came about 10 years ago, when we had a misuse of the outpatient use with our clients, our elders, with their diabetes care. And so we wanted to know, why are our clients falling through the gaps, and they're not being looked after, even though there's research-based standard of care for diabetes, and why are they not being managed? So that's where we got introduced with the research, and along with Dr. Smith-Windsor. And Vivian has been our big support for all these years. So we've had numerous, we have research projects that we've been participating. And one of the things that has to also take in place is there is ethical guidelines that the elders are part of that. And those are our gatekeepers as well. And they're the ones that have to approve of things to happen in the community, along with leadership and management. And that's endorsed by BCR. So that is our ethical, I guess, protocol in regards to allowing research. And because of the growth that has happened in us since I've been there, there's been a change. When we moved from the system that has been in place before, after colonization, we had the Health Canada model, or MSB model, that we were running, and we only had but one nurse that comes once a month to come and deliver health. And so ever since health transfer happened, it was because of the people needed to take their determination to manage their health. And so that was the catalyst that made things happen. So from one nurse, one CHR, and health director, we grew to have about 25 people, 26 people of staff that do a holistic health programming. And as well, we also have traditional health. We've been successful in collecting our data, and we've been running our traditional program for the past 10 years. And we've been collecting our stats. We weren't funded at all. We had to manage, and creatively, with the help of our health director, manage to build a system that is available for our community to access, because a lot of our people still rely on traditional ways of healing, and also access to traditional medicine, and also the knowledge of sharing those ceremonies and teachings, what James was talking about. We are just going and picking up those bundles again. So this is how we envision, this is our program that exists today. So when you talk about holistic healing, that is holistic healing. A lot of the programs that we offer today, our staff had to participate in a lot of the knowledge building competency. And so it was going back and learning about our traditions, the Circle of Life teachings, the medicines. And so that's some of the few things that our staff had to learn in order to function with that two-eyed seeing. So we continue to be, we're still being guided with our elders. And so that's just basically, just to illustrate, our people see, we view a person as a whole being when we treat the person with whole being with traditional medicine, with a traditional healing practice that is practiced in Sturgeon Lake. And one thing about the healers, because I also work with the healers, and he said, and also they say this all the time, they said in order to restore harmony to a person, we have to look at their, first thing you need to look at is their emotional health. Because right now, your emotions direct your actions. You react with your emotions. So we need to stabilize the emotional aspect of that individual. And so that's why it's so important to have our professionals be trained with the Indigenous lens and how to help our people. So we have a number of projects with Dr. King as well, Alexandra King, with cultural intervention with addictions. So that's another work that's coming down. And I applaud Sturgeon Lake for being the trailblazers in a lot of this work, and also the work with Willie Ermine. So that strength is working with researchers that are committed to working with the community to improve the health and well-being of the community is an opportunity for mutual learning and transformation. And one thing that Vivian had to participate is land-based healing, and we took her on a ride for 4 years in learning about what it is when we talk about medicine. How do we establish that relationship with the plant life? So it was a privilege to have her come and experience that. So our experience with Dr. Rabbitskin has been that the community is involved from the inception of the proposed research project, and it's been at its completion. So we're on phase 2 with one of our projects, and it's related to pathways to wellness, and it's building a coordinated care with all the streams, and also case management. And it is really important to, for the development of skills and capacity are the two of the cornerstones of this approach to research, which is results co-development, tools, presentations, and publications. One of the biggest challenges that we found was they wanted to study us, and we wanted us to use their tools when it really doesn't really talk about our Indigenous identity. So, and that's one of the things that we want to break. We had an opportunity to co-design a tool that is culturally appropriate, one that is addressing all the four aspects, as well their identity and language and wakutun. All of those systems that Dr. McCoke has talked about, we were building something like that, and so we're working with that and how that's going to capture and support the person that is seeking help. So in our community, it is building that system, one that they will, one that they want to approach, whether it's Western or traditional approach, it's always choice related. So, and that's it. I'll end there. Thank you for listening.
It's very rewarding and humbling when the teacher becomes the student. Thank you, both of you. I'm going to ask Jacqueline Ottmann to come forward and conclude our panel. So.
I have to make sure that this is a little bit lower for me. I welcomed you this morning. Now I get to share a little bit of a passion that I have, and that's research. I can say that the first research, and actually research, we think that it begins, or we learn about research when we begin post-secondary education or perhaps high school, but our experiencer's research happens well before that. I know mine did. As I said this morning, spending time with particularly my one grandmother, Marjorie, and just learning so much from her in terms of Indigenous thought, Indigenous ways of being and doing. And another research project that I was engaged in, you can call it informal research, but really all of the stages of research were a part of that. It's when I was 16 years old. And I was in our community, like in a lot of First Nation communities, high school students are employed. Either in our case, it was to update, maintain our sports grounds, and pick garbage from the ditches. Different community-based service activities. And that summer, because I was I was kind of like the student who was at the highest grade. So I think I was in grade 10 or something. We didn't have anybody in grade 11 and 12 at that particular time. We went to Chief and Council and said, we'd like to do something different other than maintaining our community, which is important, but we would like to learn about who we are. And I think a part of research, whether it's in the health area or education, it doesn't matter what it is, it's about trying to learn about who we are. Whether it's our mental state, or our physical state, our spiritual state, or intellectual state. So it's learning, pieces of ourselves as individuals and as humanity. So in that case, Chief and Council said, okay, you could do this. We will support you as long as you come back each week and give us an update. So the questions back then was, who are we and where do we come from? And that actually led to two other questions, is where are we going and what are our responsibilities? And so as students, we began with our family tree. Just by developing that tree, we learned so much about our community and who we are as a result of that. And we wanted to learn more and more and more. And these are a group of high school kids. And so my dad had a new van, and our first outside journey into research was at our local news office, because we were hearing about people in our community, some of the things they've done and various stories. And so we went to the news office to look for these news stories. And it was there where the lady said, there's archives that you could go to. And we said, well, where are those archives, right? And they said, well, U of S has archives, U of R has archives. So, here we are really pumped about this project. And so basically, I asked my dad, and I'm a brand new driver, right? If we could borrow the van. We had no adult chaperone, but we drove here to Saskatoon, and we just showed up at the archives. We found our way on campus and showed up at the archives, and we said, we'd like to do some research. No one taught us formally how to do research, but this is community-driven research. Right, community-based research, and that's what we're talking about now and what we're advocating for. We found tons of information. Well, we thought it was tons as kids, and we photocopied all we could. Then we thought, well, let's go to Regina then. Not all in the same day. I mean, so it was like the week later we showed up in Regina, and we went to those archives and photocopied, and we learned that two-thirds of our community was fraudulently sold. And so we were indignant as high school kids, and we said, this is wrong. And we went to Chief and Council and said, did you know this? And they said, yeah, it's in our stories. They said, well, what are you doing about it? And they said, well, we have a lawyer working on it. And we asked where the lawyer was, and we borrowed the van again, and we went to the law office, and we brought all of our documents and said, what are you doing about this? He had this big smile on his face, like, what are you, just the last thing he thought, would have walked into his office were a group of high school kids with all of this data. So in 2001, that we feel, and I feel that perhaps we contributed to the ratification of our specific claim. But so that's, I really appreciated listening to the story of Sturgeon Lake and Dr. King's presentation. And so that's my passion is research today, and I teach an Indigenous methodology class where I have taught it at the University of Calgary, where I was there for 13 years. And Indigenous methodologies is what we're advocating for today also, is how do we incorporate those Indigenous knowledges into research. And really, we have strong parallels. Indigenous peoples have engaged in research forever, right? And so we begin with protocol, proper protocol. How do you gain access to the, in a respectful way? We're talking about reciprocity. That's that back and forth, right? And so we begin with proper protocol. And then we move on to visiting. And I was talking to Stryker here today, and I was talking to an elder in Blackfoot Territory, and he says, why don't you just call it visiting, because that's what it is instead of data collection, right? I said, yeah, that makes sense. It's a lot easier, right? And so, we visit. And during that time, when you spend time with elders, you have to listen, actively listen, and be an astute observer, and mostly be silent, right, and listen. And then after that, our dissemination of knowledge is storytelling, right? Connecting to those stories and asking ourselves how they relate to us, whether, again, it's as an individual or a collective. And so those frameworks are starting to show up within the university, whether it's in health or, again, all the colleges, every aspect. I have students, I'm still supervising doctoral students today, and they're using TP teachings as a framework of their dissertation, of their whole research. They're using, there's different Cree frameworks to frame their whole research, right? The latest dissertation I read, which was last week, and it's actually an award winner, and it's by Jennifer Brandt, and so she's using Indigenous maternal ways of being and doing. That framed her whole research, right? And so it's strengthening, and it's not less than. It's actually strengthening the whole research process. And I think we're at a place where we don't have to validate that anymore within our spaces. And so we do have a lot to contribute. I have presenting tomorrow on this, so I'll be talking about ethical spaces. That's Willie Ermine. Reg Croshu speaks to that. Dwayne Donnell's ethical relationality, which is where that's the kind of how we should do research, and you should look him up. I'll be presenting, sounds like I'm promoting my talk tomorrow. I'll be presenting on some of the research that some of my doctoral students have done or are doing today. So thank you for listening, and I did have my timer on, and I know I went over time. One story that I would like to gift to you today is it's actually a book. It's not my book. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass. And the author is Kimmer, Kimmerer, I believe. And so she's a Potawatomi biologist. And so what she does is she brings that perspective into her, it's amazing. You can even download it on iTunes. And so there's this braiding, this weaving of Indigenous perspective, her Indigenous knowledges with the science that she's engaged in on a day-to-day basis. Because we have our own science, right? And I think it's time to go back and draw from that particular perspective. Gitchimigut.
we have time for questions. So I believe there are microphones. Oh, here come our runners. But there's also an opportunity, if you have downloaded Poll Everywhere, to ask questions on the app. So are there questions or comments that you would like to make to our panelist? Okay, is there a microphone coming here?
Yeah. Buju. Hi, Norma. It's nice to see you again. Norma is one of my support system that keeps me alive this long. So hi. I want to know, I know you guys are just kind of catching up. I've been in the HIV business, so I'm coming from this aspect. We've been researched over and over and over, and I think we're researching the research, and we've been criticized, analyzed, poked, and prodded. Is there any way that we can move beyond research and maybe do land-based research? Have any of you know about that? Because normally we don't work under fluorescent lights, steel and concrete. We go back to the land.
Okay. Thanks. Did you want to address that to anybody in particular, or anybody on the panel who'd like to take it?
Norma or the other lady on the end, please.
Okay, sure. Great. Okay, Norma's got the microphone right now, and there's a microphone right there. So.
It's nice to see you, Lynn. Actually, it's timely question that you just asked. It's one of the things that we have been hearing from our people that are living with HIV. They're the ones that are experts with their disease. And people like Lynn, our sister here, who's a living person that has experienced, who's using traditional medicine, is our expert in that. So we've been advocating for peers to be seen as resource people in the community, and not only to be funded as well, but also Health Canada needs to recognize that we have our experts. We need to build capacity in the community, and that's what we've been saying in our community, because we've had to deal with the crisis as well, and we've been relying a lot of the direction from peers that are living with HIV or Hep C, and they are choosing culture, and there's miracles that, you've lived for over 20 years. We have role models such as yourself, as Ken Ward, over 20 or 30 years now, and they've been walking with culture and the medicines with that knowledge system. And so that's what they've chosen, and so it's time to validate that health system. And I think that with the work that's coming up with Dr. King, we are using that as cultural intervention, and we hope to share more of that knowledge as the work that is currently undertaken. Maybe you want to be participant of that, just go see Dr. King over there, and we can invite you. We're doing another project that is celebrating the culture as an intervention with people that use drugs or else, and also with people living with HIV and Hep C.
Dr. King here and Dr. King there are new to Saskatchewan, and we are very grateful to have both of them. They are experts in their field and have been involved in research in this area. So we'll hear from Dr. King, I think, later on in the conference, the other Dr. King. So Jackie had a comment about your question.
Yeah.
So.
And is this
that
working?
on?
Okay, so I really appreciate the question, the comments, and I think it is time, and that's the new phrase that's emerging right now is reconciliation. So it's the action part, and as was suggested, we're starting to what we call saturate our findings. That means that we're starting to find the same things over and over and over and over again. And so there is a point where it's, well, let's begin to implement. And so there is that general frustration of being researched on or over without consultation. And so more and more, again, there are communities that are saying, we don't want this to happen anymore, and they're developing their own research ethics boards. The Mi'kmaq have done that, the Mohawk have done that, and there's actually an organization called First Nation Information Governance Center. And Alberta also has an Alberta First Nation Information Governance Center. And so they implement OCAP, Ownership, Control, Access, and Possession of Research. And so that means that, we're starting to have more say in how research is being conducted in respectful ways again. And one word we have in our language for teacher in the Soto language is akinamage. And so akin means land, right? So when you're teaching, it should begin with that connection and acknowledgement to land. Because if you're looking at that phrase, Dino ay maganak, or all my relations, then that includes a relationship with the land. If the land is healthy, we're healthy. If we're healthy, then hopefully the land is healthy. So yeah, those different kinds of relationships that we have, I think, are really, really important. Thank you.
And Malcolm, you had some comments, and we've got 3 questions and a comment on the board,
Okay.
so we'll deal with them next.
So just briefly, and I do encourage you to talk to Dr. Alexander King or listen to her talk, but connections with the land is something that we in health research agencies are hearing about. It means many different things. There's no unique model, and that's important. The connections with the land for Indigenous people living here in the city will be a different thing than for Indigenous people in a particular community. And so we need to remember this and realize that each community is unique.
Thank you. We have 3 questions on the board, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to read all 3 of them. Yes? Okay. Yeah, we got a question from you for. Oh, it's up there? Okay. Okay. Thank you. So there are 3 questions up here, and I'm just going to throw them out to the panel. What are your thoughts of implementing land-based programming within our northern communities? As hunters and gatherers, being out on the land does take. I think it got cut off there, but maybe I think we can work with that. Are conventional research funding programs starting to align with reciprocal research approaches? And recognizing the many community organizations in the room, how and where can they connect with researchers to identify common interests and move forward in research partnerships? And then the last is a comment, thank you for sharing your wisdom. So I'm going to leave, who wants to take any one of those? Who's at it? Malcolm?
I'd like to address briefly number 2 and number 3, because I think they're related. And so I think conventional research funding programs like SHRF here in Saskatchewan, like CIHR nationally, are starting to appreciate this. But maybe more importantly, community organizations have an opportunity through our Saskatchewan Centre for Patient-Oriented Research to really get involved in research, not just as the recipients of research, but as co-creators of research. That's what it's really all about. Communities and academic community working together to do better research than either would do by themselves.
Great. Does anybody else want to take a crack at this? Viv, you have a microphone in your hand.
Well, I just wanted to add a couple of things to what Malcolm was saying, in that although they're moving towards that, the granting reviewers also need to move towards that. And we're struggling to move that in a way that's going to be reciprocal, in the sense of everybody should have some input into it. So in looking at how we're doing this, yes, the funding is there, but are we as recipients, or in fact people reviewing, thinking about how to do this in a way that's meaningful? Because I think that's really our biggest gap right at the moment.
I agree with that when we say reciprocity, the importance of reciprocity. And I think some of the conversations that I have had the last few years is that we have to develop capacity in our Indigenous communities for research. However, we also have to develop capacity with our non-Indigenous community in terms of Indigenous knowledges, and also how to review some of these applications that come in. So capacity building, it needs to happen with all of the key stakeholders. Yeah, and I do fully support, I think, the importance land-based teachings are really important because being on the land, you learn about health in so many different ways and holistic health. And so again, there needs to be capacity building in that respect too.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Okay. Okay, we have a question here.
Hi, thank you for all your insights. I'll acknowledge I'm on Treaty 6 and Métis homeland. I'm a graduate student at the University of Saskatchewan, and my question really relates to reciprocity, because I'm seeing or hearing you talk about reciprocity as being equal benefit. And I'm wondering if re-envisioning how reciprocity is being discussed here might help. In my understanding of Indigenous pedagogy, reciprocity doesn't always mean an equal exchange. So in other words, us as graduate students might spend time doing research, just spending time with community members. And so I feel like when we look at REB, when we look at community service learning, when we look at participatory action-based research, and we go through the ethical process, it's all based on a reframing that is contingent on Western values and understanding of the word reciprocity. So I'm wondering if we bring an Indigenous understanding of that word of reciprocity, if that could change that balance where, and foster particularly undergrads and new academics building relationships versus producing tangibles for the university.
Jackie, did you want to take that one?
I like that question or that comment because when I was I was co-chair of our Indigenous strategy in our Faculty of Education and also campus-wide at U of C. And the first document we wrote that was to be presented to the Dean's Council or their executive committee had the word reciprocity. And so the feedback we got from that is we don't understand what you're saying. And so for the first time, and I thought, well, that's okay, we get it. But at the same time, we have to consider the metaphors of reciprocity. What is that metaphor? We have to have those conversations about what it means for each one of our organizations. And so reciprocity is an action word, right? So it's something that we're always working towards. It's relationship oriented, and so all relationships, I think, has to have that compromise, that to and fro, and sometimes it isn't. It is imbalanced. If you go into braiding sweetgrass, you will learn that all relationships have tension at one point. And so if you're going to braid a tight weave, if I ask you to take the end of this because I'm going to braid the sweetgrass, you will feel me pull and tug on it because what I'm trying to do is to create a tight weave, right? So it stays bound and it becomes a stronger unit. So where does reciprocity fit within that example? And reciprocity is in nature. It's evident all around us, right? And even the forces of the weather is that reciprocal relationship between hot and cold forces, right? And so, yeah, and it's a great question, and we do have to consider that.
Okay, one more question.
Hi, my name is Jane Nayland Harbach, and I'm just starting a preliminary study with the Saskatchewan Registered Nursing Association, looking at what is the cultural competence and knowledge of registered nurses throughout the province around cultural competence, because we really don't have any baseline data around that. And I just would like to build on what you were saying about the meaningful relationships with all partners in the research process, and just really emphasize that includes our funding partners. And so what we ask of all partners must be respectful and dignified. And an example of that is if we ask all community partners to provide a curriculum vitae or things like that, that might not be something that they have, is a curriculum vitae that they already have typed out. And it may look very different to an academic's curriculum vitae, but being open to that and being accepting of how we come together and respect and value one another in this research process as true partners.
Thank you. As someone who submitted a community-based SSHRC grant a few weeks ago, I feel your pain. It's not appropriate, the kinds of things we ask of our community partners. Okay, we've got one more question. Nope.
Hi, my name is Mamun. Actually, the relationship I do have with Northern Saskatchewan, that I started a traditional ecological knowledge research with respect to woodland caribou. So the reason to have an opportunity to speak in here, like I understand that everybody is talking about land-based study, sharing of the research benefit between the expert or Aboriginal knowledge holders and the outside researcher. So this is the talks going on always where I go. I see this type of discussion. But my point is, like, how can we engage or do the recognition of the bush biologist, I would say. I learned like a little about the value of engaging traditional ecological knowledge with forest range planning and traditional ecological knowledge with respect to woodland caribou conservation. So my understanding is that until or unless we recognize the knowledge keeper or the elders as I would say, the bush biologist, and they're saying that, okay, how bad is this? Somebody is coming from Regina and talking about our land or water, it is polluted or not, then we are living on that land for histories, and we have a social memory to communicate with each other. That is how we sustain in there. So what are some of the steps we could take to recognize the First Nation elders or the knowledge holders in our research?
Okay. Does anyone on the panel want to address that? Norma, do you want to take that one?
Thank you for that question. That is something that our community is really want a strong hold on. For the recognition to go back to the knowledge keepers, the elders, the wisdom keepers that are guiding that process. And how can we achieve that? Well, it's like what Vivian said, it's all about being equal partners, and you have to organize and give the ownership back to the community to guide that process, how it looks and how to design that. So for us, it's giving that voice to the people in whatever way they want to guide this research that we're undertaking. It has to be, they have to be the ones that are going to guiding it. And if the researchers coming into our community, you have to understand the culture, the culture profile that you're in, and you have to be you have to participate. It's like what she said, it takes it's about building a relationship. You have to gain that trust from them, and one of the things as Indigenous people, we want to be recognized as knowledge keepers in our own right, about speaking about our what we're fighting right now is, like, we don't want to be categorized as disease. We're people that are living on this earth that have been in existence for many years, and we want to take that back, and on behalf of our kinship with the water and earth. And you hear about the hunters up north, and they see the first experience with climate change. Nobody's going to ask them about their experience, and whatever happens to the land happens to us. So we need to also be part, and that's part of our healthiness. And so right now, we know cancers are high in the north. Well, you need to find out where is that coming from. It also comes from the land. And that's going to attack the environmentalists that are out there, that what are their role in protecting the land? And you know what the effect of tar sands, it's like all of that, those are research into us, and our people already knew that to pinpoint, but on the Western framework, we have to go through this process. So elders and knowledge keepers and the hunters are part of this. They're the systems in our Indigenous communities. They're the ones that are holders as well.
Thanks, Norma. I would also encourage you, I think it's tomorrow that Dr. Lolita Bardwash is actually talking about the work that she does in the north around water. And she has a very strong community-based program where she engages with traditional knowledge keepers and elders. So she would be someone that I think could very much answer your question. I think we unfortunately have to wrap this up unless anyone has, no? Okay, we're good.